Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something big, truth decay. We've got some fascinating sources here to help us unpack what this is all about, what's driving it, and why it really matters right now.
That's right. And for you, the learner, our mission today is basically to pull out the core ideas. We're looking at academic stuff on post-truth, this concept of a deliberative communicative knowledge democracy. Quite a mouthful.
Yeah.
A big report from the RAND Corporation on truth decay in the U.S., and also what Media Defense says about misinformation and free speech. We want to connect those dots for you without, drowning you in details.
Exactly. Think of it as your essential guide to a really key part of what's happening in society. And the image we're looking at, it captures it well, doesn't it? That distressed flag over the RAND definition.
Yeah, it really sets the scene.
Increasing disagreement on facts, the blurring lines between opinion and fact, opinion getting stronger than fact, and less trust in those factual sources we used to rely on.
And it points to the drivers, too, how our brains work, those cognitive biases, the huge changes in media, especially social media, maybe gaps in education around media literacy, and, of course, the polarization we see everywhere.
Plus the consequences. Public debate breaking down, politics getting stuck, people tuning out, and just general uncertainty. Okay, let's dive in. This term, truth decay, what exactly are we talking about?
Well, it's interesting because, disagreement itself isn't the problem. People interpreting facts differently, that's normal, healthy debate.
Right.
Truth decay, though, it's more fundamental. It's this growing gap where even basic verifiable facts are up for grabs and where feelings, personal experience, opinion start to carry more weight than evidence.
So it's like what feels true is becoming more important than what is actually true.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
It really makes you wonder if we're shifting towards a public square where conviction matters more than proof.
Yeah.
And maybe focusing on, intellectual honesty is more useful than just endless fact-checking.
That brings us to the Media Defense Source and the global view on false news. They have some warnings, don't they?
They do. International standards, they say, are pretty cautious about broad bans on information just because it's labeled false news. The main concern is protecting freedom of expression.
But there's a line, right?
Oh, absolutely. That protection doesn't cover, say, governments or state officials deliberately putting out false information. They have a clear responsibility to be reliable. The real danger highlighted is that these false news laws can be incredibly vague.
Vague how?
Well, they might criminalize even small mistakes, tiny inaccuracies. And they often use really subjective terms like causing fear or alarm, things that are, easily triggered.
Which could scare people away from speaking out at all.
Precisely. It can have a chilling effect. They point to the Gambia, where journalists were actually jailed and exiled under laws like that, which were later found to violate international law. It shows the potential for abuse.
So if clamping down with laws is risky for free speech, what's the alternative? How do we fight misinformation effectively?
Well, the trend seems to be moving away from just legal bans and more towards social and educational strategies.
Okay, like what?
The big one is boosting media and information literacy, MIL. Basically, giving people the tools to think critically for themselves about the information they see.
Right, so MIL isn't just about spotting fake news headlines.
No, not at all. It's deeper. It's understanding how news works, the ethics, the standards, but also how it can be manipulated, like using dodgy images just to get clicks.
Knowing the language of news, as they put it.
Exactly. And understanding how that language can be twisted. Plus, it involves things like privacy literacy, protecting your data online, and intercultural literacy, understanding how communication shapes us and society.
Is there a concrete example of this approach?
Yeah, the UN's response during the COVID-19 pandemic is a good one. They focused heavily on getting accurate info out from trusted sources like the WHO.
Right, I remember that.
And they worked with the big online platforms to amplify facts and counter the dangerous myths circulating. It was much more about education and communication than censorship.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. We hear this phrase, post-truth era, thrown around a lot. It sounds pretty bleak, like we've just abandoned truth.
It does sound that way.
Yeah.
But one of our sources makes a really interesting point. Even calling it post-truth doesn't quite mean we've given up on the idea of truth itself.
How so?
Think about it. Someone who believes the Earth is flat still thinks it's true that the Earth is flat. They haven't discarded the concept of truth. They're just mistaken about a particular fact.
Okay. So even vaccine skeptics, for instance.
Exactly. They might have wrong ideas about vaccine safety, but they still believe there is a truth about whether vaccines work or not. The argument is we can't really function, think, believe, judge, without relying on some notion of truth.
So if the concept of truth isn't dead, what is changing? What's the concern?
Well, one idea from the philosopher Bernard Williams is that maybe it's our respect for truthfulness that's declining.
Truthfulness, meaning.
It has two sides: accuracy, trying to get things right, and sincerity, actually believing what you're saying. The worry is maybe public figures are becoming, I don't know, more casual about saying things that aren't true and maybe feel less shame when they're caught out.
That resonates. It feels like something we see. Now, what about bullshit? That term comes up too, speaking without caring if something's true or false.
Right, Harry Frankfurt's concept. It seems like it would fit, especially in politics sometimes. But the source we looked at suggests it might not be the perfect fit for understanding current political divides.
Why not? What's the distinction?
It really comes down to sincerity again. The argument is that often in politics, people sincerely believe their views, even if those views seem factually wrong or are highly polarized.
So it's less about indifference to truth and more about a deeply held but maybe flawed belief in a particular truth.
Kind of, yeah. It suggests people are often genuinely divided over what they believe is true, rather than just not caring about truth at all.
Okay, this feels like a good point to bring in the RAND Corporation's big study on truth decay in the U.S. They identified 4 key trends that are all linked. What are they?
Yeah, the RAND report lays out these 4 things. First, more disagreement about basic facts and what they mean. Second, the line between opinion and fact getting really blurry.
Okay.
Third, opinion and personal experience carrying more weight, gaining influence over facts. And fourth, less trust in those traditional sources like government agencies, universities, the media.
And they're careful to point out this isn't just normal scientific progress or healthy debate.
Exactly. That's crucial. They stress it's not about questioning how knowledge evolves or being reasonably skeptical. It's about an imbalance. An imbalance where opinion and personal feeling increasingly override established facts in public life.
When they say disagreement about facts, they mean even when the evidence is solid.
Yes, situations where the data hasn't changed or might even be stronger, but the disagreement just persists or gets worse.
It definitely sounds familiar. But is it totally new? Did we have truth decay in the past?
That's a great question, and RAND looked into it. They examined periods like the late 1800s, think yellow journalism, very sensationalist stuff,
Right.
and the 1920s and 30s with tabloids and the rise of radio. In those eras, you definitely saw some blurring of fact and opinion and declining trust in institutions, often tied to big social or economic changes.
What about more recently, the 60s and 70s?
Yeah, they looked at that too. There was certainly declining social consensus then, but RAND suggests it was often more about arguments over political or social norms rather than disputes over core facts themselves.
So the researchers think today might be different.
They suggest it might be, yeah, potentially unique in how severe and widespread it feels today compared to those earlier periods.
Okay, so what is driving it now? What are the key causes, according to RAND?
They point to a mix of factors, all kind of feeding into each other. First, our own brain's cognitive biases.
Like confirmation bias, seeking out stuff we already agree with.
Exactly that. We're sort of wired to do it, which makes us vulnerable to misinformation that fits our existing views. It helps create those echo chambers.
Okay, what else?
Second, big changes in the information system itself. The 24/7 news cycle, and obviously social media. It's an environment where, well, sensationalism and strong opinions can spread incredibly fast, sometimes faster than careful fact-checked reporting.
And education plays a role.
Potentially, yes. The report suggests that with all the pressures on schools, maybe there's been less focus over time on teaching critical thinking and media literacy skills. Those are the tools you need to sort the good information from the bad.
Makes sense. If you don't know how to evaluate sources,
You're more likely to fall for something unreliable. And then finally, there's political and social polarization. It acts like an amplifier for everything else.
how so?
It creates those echo chambers we mentioned, where you're mainly hearing from people who agree with you. It reinforces your beliefs and makes it harder to even encounter, let alone consider, opposing viewpoints or facts that challenge your side.
Now, one of the academic pieces we looked at proposes a really interesting idea, potentially as a way forward, this deliberative communicative knowledge democracy, or DCKD. That's a bit of a mouthful. Can you break it down?
It is dense, yeah. But the core idea is about trying to balance the need for reliable knowledge with the value of having lots of different voices and perspectives.
Okay.
So imagine it has different parts. There's an assembly, maybe like a citizen's jury, carefully weighing evidence. Their insights might feed into a council, perhaps a decision-making body.
And how does the public debate fit in?
That's where the arena and the platform of plurality come in. The arena is pictured as a space for, like, logic-driven debate, aimed at finding truth and pushing back against fake news.
Okay, focused on facts and reason.
Right. But the platform of plurality is different. It's meant to be a space where diverse voices, even emotional arguments, can be heard. It acknowledges that public life isn't only about rational truth. Emotions and values matter too. The whole model tries to protect truth through deliberation, not censorship.
That's a really ambitious but interesting model. So we've talked about what truth decay is and what might be causing it. What about the consequences? What does the RAND report say happens when truth decay takes hold?
They highlight some pretty serious consequences. First, just a general erosion of constructive civil discourse. When we can't agree on the basic facts, having a productive conversation about solutions becomes almost impossible.
You see that all the time, right? Arguments just go in circles because people are starting from completely different realities.
Exactly. Second, it leads to political paralysis. If policymakers can't agree on the facts of a problem, say climate change or the economy, they get stuck. Gridlock. Nothing gets done.
Which we've certainly seen plenty of.
Third, it can cause people to become alienated, disengaged from public life. If you lose trust in institutions, if you feel overwhelmed by conflicting information, you might just check out, stop participating.
Which is obviously really damaging for democracy.
Absolutely. And finally, RAND points to growing uncertainty in national policy. It's hard to make effective, coherent policies, whether domestic or foreign, when there is no shared factual basis for decisions.
Okay, so understanding the problem is one thing, but finding solutions. What does RAND suggest on that front? Where do we go from here?
Well, they're clear that understanding it is just step one. They propose a pretty broad research agenda to really dig deeper.
Like what kind of research?
Things like more detailed historical comparisons, looking internationally to see how other countries are dealing with similar issues or if they have different experiences. Learning from others, basically.
That makes sense. Don't assume we're alone in this.
Right. Also, better data collection to track these trends more precisely. And crucially, research to understand the mechanisms better. How do cognitive biases really interact with social media algorithms, for example?
Getting into the nitty-gritty.
Exactly. And then exploring potential solutions. This includes looking at how information spreads, the role of different institutions, media, schools, government, the dynamics of polarization itself, and finding ways to maybe bridge some of these divides.
In technology, can it be part of the solution, not just the problem?
That's part of the agenda, too. How can we potentially harness technology to promote reliable information and foster more constructive dialogue, rather than just amplifying the noise and division?
Okay, so wrapping this up then. For you, the learner, listening to this, what are the main things to take away from our deep dive today?
I think the biggest thing is realizing that truth decay is it's really complex. It's not just about fake news or people being uninformed. It's a deeper shift in how we engage with information, with facts, and frankly, with each other.
It has deep roots.
Deep roots, yeah. Understanding that the drivers are on psychology, the media environment, polarization, and seeing the consequences like the breakdown in conversation, the political stalemate, the uncertainty. That awareness is key just to navigate the world today.
And maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Think about your own role in this ecosystem. How do your own biases shape what you consume, what you share? Are there small steps you can take, maybe in your own conversations, to encourage more listening, more focus on reliable sources?
That's a great point. This has really just been a starting point today.
Definitely. We really encourage you to dig into these sources if you're interested, and just generally to be critical consumers of information. Ask yourself, what part of this truth decay picture stands out most to you? And what kinds of solutions feel like they might actually make a difference? Lots to think about.